start with your latest article in EPW, that Ambedkar's Geetha.
Yes, Ambedkar's Geetha is an article I published, an essay, full-length essay, about 9 pages long in EPW last December. It's actually a part of a larger project that I have been engaged with after this work on the Enlightenment that you talked about. The essay on Ambedkar, let me just briefly tell you what this essay is about and how it fits in with the larger work that I'm doing. This essay is called Ambedkar's Geetha, and it is how a Dalit intellectual's reading of Bhagavad Gita. And it was, I started writing it, I started actually reading Gita quite intensely and sincerely, with trying to understand it in its fullness rather than just with an intention of condemning it.
Right.
Because before you come to a critique, you have to immerse yourself in the subject matter. And of course, I'm not a stranger to Gita. Gita is not a stranger to me. I, grew up in a fairly sort of middle of the road, believing, practicing Hindu family. A lot of popular worship of gods and recitation of Ramayana and Gita were a part of my growing up. So I'm not unfamiliar with the Bhagavad Gita. But I wanted to understand it more fully. I mean, I had never really read it. I mean, I was familiar. Or who is not familiar? Anybody growing in India knows what Bhagavad Gita is. So, and the context which started me on this was my earlier involvement in Ambedkar study. I mean, I had been reading Ambedkar, starting with his Annihilation of Caste and his other works on philosophy of Hinduism. And there he refers to the Gita as the manifesto of inequality. So I had Ambedkar in the background. I had my childhood memories of the Bhagavad Gita. And the political context was when Sushma Swaraj made this issue in the parliament that Bhagavad Gita should be made into a national book, Rashtriya Granth, as she called it. And this was announced with much fanfare that, this Bhagavad Gita, which is 5,000 years old, must be included in our school curricula. And it did not become law. So far it hasn't become the law. But I've been living and working in Chandigarh, which is part of Haryana, Punjab, it's that part of the country. Haryana government has made Bhagavad Gita a state granth. The schools have to teach the Gita. So I thought this was a opportune moment to look at Gita. And what I wanted to show was that our lawmakers who take an oath on the Constitution to uphold the Constitution, they cannot simultaneously be upholding the Constitution and teaching the Gita, because the two are in fundamental contradiction with each other.
National books.
Yeah, they cannot be two national books. Because others also had pointed out that Constitution is our national book, no other. But I said that there is a fundamental contradiction between the two. Because
not just because it is part of a religious tradition, beyond that. That definition of secularism in which religion and government will not come together, India has never followed that. In India, there is no wall of separation. So just to say that you cannot have a religious book in schools is an American style secularism, but it doesn't apply to India. So that's not good enough to say that it is anti-secular to bring a religious book into publicly funded institutions, because that's always been done in India.
Because Indian constitution also does not say that the state shall not, propagate religion. The constitution says the state will be impartial to all religions. So it can
Sarva Dharma Sambhav.
Sarva Dharma Sambhav. That as long as it supports all religions, it can support a religion.
Okay.
So that wasn't good enough to say that it's anti. You cannot bring religion, because that's the Indian practice. And I wanted to go below that to indicate that on 3 levels to which our constitution is committed to, namely equality, right? The scientific temper, the 51H in which you criticize, and there was one more issue that not liberty.
Justice. Justice.
There were 3 issues that I take on in which I show that Krishna's teachings go diametrically opposite to this, and especially this issue of hierarchy, because if you understand the intellectual context, the worldview of the Bhagavad Gita, in which the teachings of Arjuna have come down, if you place Bhagavad Gita in the philosophical context in which it was written, what you find, in my opinion, is a socio-biological determination of hierarchy.
Okay.
How? Because of this connection between the gunas, the karmas, and the birth that you shall have, the punarjanam. Krishna actually very clearly says it in its very opening chapter, 4th chapter, that I created varna out of guna and karma. I created varna, and he then very clearly, and I show it step by step, how Bhagavad Gita provides a complete philosophical, which is at the same time religious, because Hinduism is grounded in not in some 10 commandments of God, but in a worldview, in a cosmology. So how Bhagavad Gita provides a rational, within quotes, rational within that framework, justification for the operation of varna, out of which varna are the 4 fundamental categories, out of which then, depending upon the locality, the various jatis then place themselves. Jatis get their status from being placed in a varna, and there are, of course, we know multitudes of jatis, and there is some variation. Some jati may be superior in one region and may be relatively inferior in another region. There is flexibility within the jatis. You can improve your status within the jati, within the varna. You can become better off, less worse off, and even across the varnas you can Sanskritize. We know all that, but caste operates fundamentally within these 4 varnas, for which the Bhagavad Gita provides. So I, in this essay, lay out step by step how Krishna's teachings to Arjuna, in which he openly, basically, his idea of mukti, when he says everyone can get moksha, and you don't have to renounce the world in order to seek moksha, is this nishkam karma. Nishkam karma boils down to do what you are supposed to do, depending upon where you are born. And then that kind of karma will not bear any further karma which will tie you to punarjanma, which will tie you to the wheel of I am in this reading influenced by Ambedkar, and I bring in Ambedkar as a lens to look at, but the teachings of so that is one issue that I look at, how Bhagavad Gita provides a religious legitimation for Varna system, Varna Vyavastha. Second, I look at the issue of tolerance, which we celebrate that Hindus have been so tolerant, and there are many verses in Bhagavad Gita in which Krishna does say that doesn't matter who you worship, ultimately all your prayers will come to me because I am the superior God. So it can be read as the look, he's so liberal, whoever, but he places himself at the top, and there is a kind of inclusive in a sense of gobbling up other gods, in the sense that somebody you make room for other gods, but all of them as sort of manifestations and somehow lesser gods to this particular god. And he very clearly lays out that yes, bhakti is also a path to moksha, but he says superior to that is jnana. So there is this hierarchization of the kind of worship that you shall do, and again he ties the mode of worship with the varna and your gunas that you are born with. Those with the more sattvic guna will be naturally attracted to jnana yoga, and those with tamasic gunas will worship demons and lesser gods. But he says, even if you're worshipping these lesser gods, those demons, but they'll all come to me, so it's okay. Go ahead, worship according to your essence, your nature. Okay, so tolerance is there in Hinduism, but it is also assimilative. I mean, it doesn't make genuine room for freedom to choose another god if you're so inclined, because all gods are ultimately me. They're all in one. The third issue I tackle is this where our constitution and Bhagavad Gita clash, is this whole business of scientific temper, in which I point to number of verses in the Bhagavad Gita where his message to Arjuna is, stay away from these hetuvadis. Stay away from hetuvadis. And your only way to reach me is to do your duty. Do not ask questions. So that is, I thought that given the political times we were living in, it's important to really take on this text, which is sort of been shoved down our throats, and to look at what exactly are you teaching? What do you want? Why do you want to teach Gita? It goes against the values that we are formally committed to. And I think it's that spread of Bhagavad Gita is going on, even though there is no national law per se, but these Gita schools, Gita pravachans,
everywhere.
That hegemony of Bhagavad Gita is everywhere. And so that was that. But in fact, I started writing the essay on Gita. I published it in in December last year. But I started working on it, thinking seriously about it a couple of years before that, as a part of a book of essays I published on history of science, which is called Science in Saffron, Skeptical Essays in History of Science, in which again, when it was provoked, I teach history of science in ISA, where I teach a course, Introduction to History of Science, where we start with ancient Greeks, Mesopotamians, Egyptians, and the Vedic Hindus from ancient times, about 2,000 years BCE, even 3,000 years BCE, where Mesopotamia is concerned, and to look at how humanity's ways of understanding the natural world have changed and evolved. So I follow the career of not the scientific method per se, but our understanding of nature for these last 2,000 years, and culminating in the 16th and 17th century scientific revolution. It starts with Copernicus, 1543, ends with Isaac Newton in 1687. Of course, scientific progress, of course, has exploded since those days, but this period, a very fertile, highly creative work, transformed how we will understand nature. There was a shift in both metaphysics and in methodology. Metaphysics in the sense of understanding the natural world as in mechanical terms, as particles in motion, whose laws, they follow certain laws of attraction and repulsion, which Newton, of course, figures out and quantifies. And so all of nature, as constituted by corpuscles, as they would call it, they were not sure they are atoms or they are just some tiny particles. Corpuscles which interact, which themselves have no intentions, no human attributes, no divine laws that they follow. They follow laws of force, which brings them together, which sets them apart,
humans can understand,
and which we can understand, express mathematically, and test experimentally. This was the great work, especially, Copernicus starts this revolution, but the great Galileo, who understands that if the Earth is to be a planet that is rotating in the space, then the laws of motion have to be re-examined. Why? Because objects, when they fall down on Earth, they seem to give an appearance of a stationary Earth, in the sense that if you throw a stone from a tower, and if the Earth is moving, why is it that the stone doesn't fall behind us because the tower has moved, because the whole Earth is moving? Why is it that the stone falls at the foot of the tower and not behind the tower? And his point was, if we have to prove Copernicus right, we have to understand why is it that the falling stone actually behaves as if the Earth is stationary while it is moving. So the laws of inertia were built up. Galileo started the work on anticipated, and a method of acceleration of falling bodies. Galileo's very famous experiments with inclined planes, in which he mathematically understands how a body accelerates as it falls under gravity. And then those laws finally formulated by Newton in his 3 laws. And in this century and a half, our understanding of the basic constituents of nature and how to understand and how to approach them underwent a tremendous shift. And all of modern science is sort of built upon this fundamental transformation that took place. So given this history of science and the break in really humanity's understanding of nature, not just Hindu understanding, all other civilizations prior to this scientific revolution thought of nature as having a sort of inbuilt tendencies. A stone has to fall down because it is reaching to its center, and it wants to get to its center. And those tendencies, those swabhav, the nature has a swabhav, was explained either by Lord created this matter and gave it its laws in Judeo-Christian traditions, or in our case, it is a manifestation of the spirit, and the spirit, it's consciousness. That is why in Hinduism we find matter, and that's where Sankhya philosophy becomes very important, because Sankhya is the orthodox Hindu understanding of the substance of which everything is made up of. And Triguna, these are 3 strands of matter which come coded with virtues.
either you are sattvic, some strands of matter are more subtle and they have virtues, they are spiritual, they are lighter in color, they are, all those bundle of virtues which we consider more holy, pious, spiritual, good, and those who are born with excess of sattvic guna will have these virtues. Matter come encoded with virtues. And my point is that this metaphysics has not taken the historic transformation of reason, of our understanding of nature that happened with modern science. We haven't engaged with that. We still talk in terms of tendencies and this and that. And our method, if you were to ask, how do you know? If you were to ask a Vedantist, how do you know? They'll say, through a certain yogic practice, you raise your consciousness to a level where these hidden realities become, they are intuitively clear to you. And that is what in Hinduism you keep saying that you experience them, You just don't know them, but you experience them. They are shown to you in your heart. It's an intuitive experience. That still continues to be our old paradigm. And so this is one side of the story. The other side of the story is we continue to proclaim that all the developments of modern science we had anticipated, they are already known to us. Our old orthodox religion is in accord with modern science. All the time we keep making these claims. So what I wanted to do in the skeptical essays that I wrote, that to backtrack a little bit, what happened is that again when BJP came to power, they were like going rah rah rah, they were suddenly drunk with power, and in this major science congress, there are some very silly claims about Hinduism that Brahmastra was a nuclear weapon and etc. etc. Those are too silly. They are obviously interpreting mythology as empirical science, and that I won't waste my time fighting that, because what can you do? I mean, there's nothing more to say than just say, oh my God, like what's wrong with you guys? But there are certain persistent historical claims that actual factual supposedly claims in history of science that are made constantly by Hindu Orthodox Hindus. One of them is that Pythagorean theorem. It is a very basic theorem to mathematics. It's a simple theorem, the hypotenuse, relationship between the hypotenuse and the two sides of a right angle triangle. It's a very fundamental theorem, and so we keep on making a claim that Pythagoras stole it from us. Baudhayana in Sulva Sutras, which was written in 800 BCE, had already figured it out, and Pythagoras is stolen it from us. That's one claim. It's been a pet theory of a Hindu nationalist. It was repeated again at the Science Congress. The second claim, which I think all of us grow up with, that zero is we are the ones. The shunya, the figure of zero, decimal too. We claim that we are the first ones to come up with decimal system. Then the third claim has to do with your favorite ideas of Ayurveda.
Plastic surgery.
Plastic surgery. Now, there are grains of truth in all of these claims, but unless you put these claims, my point is, unless you examine these claims in a comparative global perspective, if you are only looking at India and say, ye bhi tha, this, we were out there. So forget about the transformation of modern science into modern science. We won't go there. That is way too advanced and serious a matter. But on these basic historical facts, which we claim to be true of us, if you examine, and all of these are pre-scientific revolution, obviously. These all relate to the ancient histories. So my point was that let's look at ancient India's achievements in a comparative perspective in which we bring in the other sister civilizations and see if there were any exchanges going on, rather than just starting with this assumption that all that everybody knew came from us. Could it be that we also learned something from somebody else? Is it a possibility that we learned? That was one. And secondly, just okay, we were doing these great things. What were others doing? They were not living in caves, what were others doing,
Even that they would claim sometimes.
Yeah, they would. But so let's look at what others were doing, and instead of just beating our breast that we were the greatest, let's see where we stand. So I look at these three issues of Pythagorean theorem, the zero, and certain developments in medicine. So in Pythagorean theorem, there is ample evidence, and Greeks themselves would admit that Pythagoras wasn't the original Greeks. Greek historians, as far as back as Herodotus, completely admit that Pythagoras learnt his geometry from the Egyptians. So that is well settled. Pythagoras' importance in the history of science is somewhere else. That is for mathematization of nature. That's a separate story. But it is very well known that 3000 BCE we have these tablets, clay tablets from Mesopotamia, showing very clearly the existence of Pythagorean triples, in which you calculate those three sides of a right angle triangle, which give you the Pythagorean equation: a square is equal to b square plus c square. So we have that. We have from Mesopotamia 3000 years BCE. There's plenty of evidence that this particular geometrical relationship was well understood by Mesopotamians. There is some evidence by 350 BCE. Egyptians knew it. No, Egyptians who could build these pyramids must have known this particular, but there is no hard and fast evidence because they wrote on papyrus rolls and scrolls. The evidence, the latest evidence by 350 Egyptians show some knowledge of it. But Mesopotamians definitely much, and Chinese, we complete records, 600 BCE records of China, not just using Pythagorean theorem, but proving the proposition. Which Chinese are the first ones to have proven it. Euclid came much later than the Chinese. Indians prove it only in 1200 CE, Common Era, Bhaskaracharya, 1200 Common Era. And they say his proof was influenced by the Chinese proof. Joseph Needham's work is very influential, in which Joseph Needham is a historian of Chinese science, and he traces this. So I just lay out. I don't have to say anything, but evidence speaks for itself. That our insistence that Pythagoras was the original, Bodhyana was the original Pythagoras, it just doesn't have any feet to stand on. No commentary is necessary. If you, in my opinion, if there it is. On the zero, it is a more controversial case that I make, again based on my understanding of historical, for evolution of zero as a numeral. Zero as a metaphysical concept is different from zero as a mathematical figure, which holding a place value of nil, place nothing on this. It is well established by mathematicians and historians of mathematics that evolution of zero depends upon a prior evolution of a place value. Only those cultures which had a place value system, in which the value of a numeral will change according to the place it has in a number. So if you look at Indian records, Brahmi, we don't have numerals written in Devanagari script. Sanskrit was never written down. Sanskrit was
Oral
written
tradition.
down much later, like much later. For all its evolution took place in oral form. So what did Sanskrit numerals look like? We know only in Devanagari numerals when they start appearing in the early centuries of, middle centuries of with Brahmagupta and all, with Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, the classic mathematicians in the medieval India. Prior to that, the first Indian numerals, I'm talking of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, not spoken numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4 or Sahasra or not that, not spoken numbers but written down numerals comes from Brahmi scripts, Ashoka's pillars. And that period of, there are many caves dating back to that period of Ashoka, early Gupta period, in which, see, Ashoka edicts, there are many edicts written in Brahmi, but they are words. The numbers are harder to find. So there are a couple of caves in Maharashtra in which numerals have been found and traced, and it is very clear that Brahmi does not have place value. Brahmi numerals did not follow place value. So till about this Gupta period is around the early Common Era, 3rd, 4th centuries CE. Devanagari numerals come from Brahmi, and Brahmi was not place value. So we certainly find in the 7th, 8th century India, we start finding place value. And 0 as a Shunya Bindu starts emerging. The first evidence of, now this is quite important, first evidence of an actual numeral 0 does not come from India. If India is the birthplace of 0, one would expect it to be here rather than, it is found in Southeast Asia. It's found in Burma, Malay Islands and Cambodia. So the theory has been, why is it that this is the case? And I am quite persuaded by the work of Joseph Needham and another Singapore-based historian of mathematics by the name of Lam Long Yang, who has put forward this theory that the Chinese had a fully functional decimal place value system long before, in nearly 300 centuries BCE. How did that work? It wasn't a written down number. It was a kind of a primitive pocket calculator using rods, counting rods, and they had exactly a decimal place value. After 9, they would move the rod to the 10th place, and that would be 11. They won't have to write 10 plus 1. Placing the rod in the next point would mean that this now means 11. So the hypothesis is that and this rod counting system, fully decimal, place value based, was a very popular system, which was used by everybody from the government officials to peasants, and monks. And so the trade between China and India dates back to early BCE. I mean, 4th century BCE, we have the earliest evidence of trade going on. And this is after, of course, Buddhism starts, and after Buddhism starts spreading to, the traffic is growing enormously. So the theory that Joseph Needham, this is not original to me, I'm using their work. These two scholars have suggested that it is possible that travelers, traders, monks traveling between India and China, passing through these Southeast Asian colonies, were able to mix up the two cultures. And so the ideas are probably came from the Chinese civilization, and they were given this final form, the shapes and the forms in the Indian system. And that is what the Hindu, and finally absorbed by the Arabs and worked with, they evolved the system further. Khwarizmi and all created, algebraic forms out of this arithmetic. And that ends up becoming the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, which is place value and zero based, because it is we do not find the existence of place value in written down numbers. Even the concrete, there is another way of counting bhuta sankhya in Hinduism, in Indian mathematics, in which you use concrete numbers. If you want to say 2, you will say chakshu. If you want to say 3, you will say Vedas, 3 Vedas or 4, I don't know how many Vedas. So rituals are mixed up. I mean, even there are 3 fires in a Vedic ritual. There are 3 fires. So 3 would be those 3 fires. You could refer to that as. Okay. So there is a concrete number system in which there is some indication of a place value. There is, but but there you don't use 0 as a number. You don't. You say Akash to indicate that there is nothing. So that is. So I basically question this deep-seated view that India was the first and the only one to come up with 0. So that is a very long chapter, the longest in the whole book. Then I look at development of medicine, in which, I mean, again, when Modi says that there must be some cosmetic surgeon who did that, there were, when the idea of rhinoplasty was there, I mean, nose reconstruction, but I ask, like, what happened to it, why did it die out? And then I bring in this great, for comparative purposes, the great Vesalius, Andreas Vesalius, in the 16th century Europe, who transformed the study of anatomy by carrying out anatomical dissections himself, rather than allowing a barber to dissect the bodies. And around that time, when Europe was literally overhauling, transforming its understanding of human body, I look at where was Ayurveda at that time, where was Ayurvedic understanding of human bodies, and it is still stuck at a primitive level of heart is like a lotus which droops at night and wakes up in the morning, and so it had little understanding of human physiology, and because dissections were not really permitted. I mean, you could scrub a body and see its parts, but an actual dissection, opening up a dead body, was considered. I mean, I know people who say that don't trust the Manusmriti, but I think Manusmriti was not. Look, I mean, there aren't enough evidence to show one way or the other how scrupulously Manusmriti was being followed. We don't know, and neither does those who deny its importance know. It's on purely evidential basis, you cannot really decide. But there are certain factors. I mean, out of all the Smritis, Manusmriti has been commented upon by all the major Indian philosophers. There are 9 major commentaries on Manusmriti. And why did they not write commentaries on other Smritis? And the fact that when the British came asking for which is your legal text, Brahmin said Manusmriti. Were they just, why would they point to Manusmriti and not to some Gautama Smriti or some? So to say that, oh, this is a British creation, yes, the British asked this question, but the answer was provided by our own priests, our pandits. So why should we distrust them entirely? So, but if you read Manusmriti, it is very clear there are strictures against touching a dead body are written down in details, and and the status of medical men, as you well know, you were not to marry your daughter to a doctor, and pus was their food.
The food offered is like pus and blood.
Right. So with all this, I basically said instead of just proclaiming ourselves to know everything, let's find out why is it that we got left behind. Let's be honest and examine our history. Then I have one more, which is my pet theme of how Swami Vivekananda ends up creating this tradition in which modern science is in anticipation. I mean, is anticipated by the Vedas,
right.
And so
I think that created a major impact, no? That Vivekananda's project of
Yes.
projecting Vedas, projecting the Vedic knowledge as the ultimate science.
Ultimate science.
Yeah, so many people are carrying it nowadays.
Right. And it's, he was writing in the 19th century, so his examples will be conservation of energy, karma is like conservation of energy. Then science changed.
And ether.
Ether is a big thing for him. Then subtle fluids of ether, which science is also finding and all that. Then quantum mechanics is now replaced, it's quantum mechanics because of indeterminacy. They say that proves the existence of spirit in nature, which no self-respecting quantum mechanics will say that, because that's one interpretation of the quantum mechanics. So, but he set this paradigm in which you say that science validates ancient knowledge. So that's what I've been doing, and it's a brief description.
Yeah. See, one thing we started off on the Ambedkar's Geetha. There you said Ambedkar's was in your background. That, of course, you have been earlier also. You have been talking about the Devi and Buddha of Ambedkar. What essentially strikes me is that Ambedkar was, of course, an enlightenment person. He was a universalist. Present-day Ambedkarites in India, for example, they do not espouse, many of them do not espouse the universalism and the enlightenment value of Ambedkar.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
No, I agree with you. And I'm very troubled by it, really, because present-day Dalits have gotten immersed in identity politics. To them, Dalit liberation means probably, defending the reservations and a certain sort of vote bank politics of some sorts. If you're Dalit, you'll vote for Dalit, or Dalit politicians trying to get the Dalit votes by giving them special privileges here. They are promising special privileges. But to me, Mayawati is a great example of these contradictions, in which she made a god of Ambedkar himself, turned him into Buddha, and in order to win in their votes, rather than the Enlightenment project, the critique of
cultural common sense.
That has just fallen off the.
Ambedkar was very clear on that.
Yes.
You should destroy the Shastras.
Yes.
That kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's precisely that is my argument with the Sanskritists, Instead of going into that this text says this and getting into high textual analysis, he says, look at what sense people have made out of these Shastras. And don't confuse the issue by going over text like that, but how do these texts speak to people? And my contention is the metaphysics of the text has formed the common sense of ordinary Hindus, of this, you're born with certain sanskars, and the sanskars depend upon what kind of lives you have led in the past and you're leading today. And sanskars are not just behavioral traits, but your inborn tendencies. That to me, the text, people have interpreted texts as they are written. There is no debate about it. And Ambedkar, I share that. To me, that is why Ambedkar is so important to me, because he was the only one, in my opinion. I'm sure Periyar was a great rationalist too, but Ambedkar had the courage to openly say that people practice caste not because they are bad people or evil people, but because they are religious. So in order to destroy, annihilate caste, you have to annihilate the principles, the Shastras which teach these principles. And both intellectually and I grew up in the heart of this religiosity, So I know how it feels. I mean, both experientially, intellectually. I want to, I do believe, as we were saying, that unless you change the facts, values don't go away. You know, values make sense because you think the world is a certain way and you should do this because that is the way the world is. And if your understanding of the world changes, values do follow. You know, some things lose their importance. If there is soul doesn't survive death, then all these things about ki, you know, marne ke baad kya hoga, you have to find other reasons for doing good rather than marne ke baad kya hoga, you know. So to me that is just something very basic, doesn't require argument, but people don't seem to allow that you need to change the metaphysics in order to transform the society. So that to me is very powerful contribution of Ambedkar.
The whole idea that there are gradations in nature, that some people are born impure, some food is bad,
right?
You know, food, even some gods,
right,
they are impure, bad. So that kind of metaphysics internalized. So that has to be really addressed. Whereas present day postcolonials, for example,
they are another story.
Say that kind of post-colonial narrative, I fear, is gripping even the Dalit activists.
Maybe. No, I don't know whether they really see. The problem with post-colonial narrative is, in my opinion, twofold. A, they look at modern science itself as not hooking on to certain reality, not telling us objective facts. Objective doesn't mean true and 100% final, but more supported by evidence than the other. They say there is no objectivity, facts are constructed out of power. That is, and then they apply this to that the colonial powers invented a kind of Hinduism, invented our own understanding of what it means to be a Hindu, what it is to be, what India is, and the argument being that caste wasn't that important before colonial power came. Manusmriti wasn't that important till everything that is we have tried to combat. They say it has not played, it is the Western construction. So what is the authentic Hinduism then, you know? So that they leave, basically post-colonial theorists are not really textual Hindu interpreters. They are not. They are sitting in departments of humanities and social sciences. They know nothing about Hinduism. But they just have cast a doubt on that we should be fighting Manusmriti. That's a Western construction. Caste is a Western construction. So then why are we fighting? B, what are the sources of our fight? We embrace science that we will change the metaphysics. They say science itself is a Western construct. So they leave you with nothing but some original, something pre-colonial that was pure, that was, we need to retrieve, and that is the agenda of the right wing. Well, what is Hindutva doing? Retrieve what is, and an emphasis on that, again, a total lack of universality, that different cultures just think differently. There are different kinds of truths, different kinds of logic. Hindu culture is entirely different from what truths hold for them, do not hold for us. And they'll say, we are holistic. You know, so this reductionist science cannot approach, does not apply to us. So this relativism and this giving complete importance to power constructs truth. Colonial power constructed colonial truths, which suited them and distorted us. That has left people like us, the Enlightenment, proponents of the Enlightenment, totally defenseless. We have no weapons left to fight. So that's why it becomes important to first. Well, actually, post-colonial theory is mostly run out. There's nothing new happening. They are not coming out with any great ideas. But it's like post-truth. Politics has ended up supporting Trump in America.
is post-colonial politics supports the Hindutva project in more ways than one.
Yeah.
So it becomes important to, and they come in a guise of extreme leftism. You know, they're fighting the imperialists,
Yeah,
you know. So they look like they are your allies, but they're not. They're talking a very dangerous language. So don't know what to do about them, except to, you know, keep arguing against them. But life is short, you know, and there are too many of them.
I recently had a very kind of enlightening experience. So one young person was talking about his professor in a central government university in a language department. She is supposed to be a post-colonial theorist, post-colonial in all matters, you know, high post-colonial theory and all that.
Which university is it?
Pondicherry.
Pondi.
Then I happened to check her. He sent some details about this woman, some writing also. So I just checked about her in internet. And I found out that she has published a biography of Kanchi Paramacharya. She has spent some time, some years, going and finding out people to talk about their experience with Kanchi Paramacharya.
Who is Kanchi Paramacharya?
That is Kanchi Paramacharya means
Shankaracharya. Kanchi.
Yeah, Kanchi Shankaracharya.
Okay.
That kind of thing. And it is funded by them, the whole work. And he writes with the blessings of them. So they are leading a completely, and of course, completely Brahmin, immersed in that, and they are talking post-colonial. Post-colonial academics and all that.
No,
and our youngsters in these universities, they think post-colonialism is something big, and whenever we say something like, they never bother about Ambedkar. Ambedkar in their eyes is somewhat inferior, probably. He is westernized, not good enough.
And it talks too simply, you know, unless you talk in a very complicated word, people think you are not profound. If you are using simple words, you know, you're not, it's, so Ambedkar, you think even today's university students, even after the Dalit awakening and all, you don't think Ambedkar
of course, that is there, but this is just one particular anecdote, which give me the insight that all this post-colonial, what should I say, the post-colonial verbiage comes from at least partly to the old Brahminic mindset and all that. Probably the traditionalists themselves in India are posing themselves as post-colonials.
Right. No, that way, you know, if you read this book, Being Different, by Rajiv Malhotra, who's, as we discussed, he's the biggest, he's the best-selling author amongst the Hindu right. Read his work. It is so immersed in post-colonial theory and vocabulary. I mean, in fact, people who espouse post-colonial theory should read this book to recognize, to see that this is where their ideas lead to, you know. Just discarding any and this whole business, Wendy Doniger's books that these people burnt and Jeffrey Kripal's, and the idea is that how dare they? How dare they? You know, say anything that is not complimentary to us. And any critique is put down to how they cannot understand India. We are different. This is Orientalism. We are different from them. You know, we are logic, our ways of knowing, our
gunas.
Our gunas. They cannot understand us. How dare they pass judgment? On the other hand, when the Orientalists write good things about us, then we don't say, how do you know we are so good? You don't understand us. Then we don't say that.
Exactly.
You know, it's, there is a complete coming together, and I think this business of textual analysis that way is Brahminical. You know, you just go sit in a library, look at the stacks of books, come up with another book, and you know, textual analysis, and then read whatever power into the text being written, and prove that it is the colonials created a distortion of actual Hinduism. If anything, if you read Ambedkar and certain other accounts of the Dalits,
colonial modernity provided outlets, the creative spaces for which were denied. Instead of distorting what existed, it opened up some doors. And
that role of British colonialism in India is strongly objected to, strongly condemned in present day, many present discussions from many quarters. They don't want to give the concede that British
was anything
did some
possible.
Good in the sense,
Precisely.
at least from the Dalit perspective and all that. That is something this caste system will never realize, or whether they realize it or not, they will never admit. They will never admit.
No.
There was another point. There was a recent in one of your talks. You were not only talks in earlier work on Ambedkar also. You were saying how Buddha, the Ambedkar's Buddha is different from historical Buddha. That has become a little important in our circles, because there has been a attempt to counter Ambedkar and Buddha, citing historical Buddha. That historical Buddha had all these problems. No, he did this to women. He was not all that free from caste prejudices. So many things.
And he accepted rebirth and karma.
Accepted so many things. And your Buddha is not very big.
Right.
So your Ambedkar, that kind of thing. No? So how would you,
No, I agree that historic Buddha was not the Buddha of Neo-Buddhism,
Can you give a short,
Navayana Buddhism.
Yeah. Can you give a short account on that? What exactly do Ambedkar's Buddha, what does exactly it mean, Ambedkar's Buddha?
Ambedkar's Buddha really depends upon a couple of connections with the historic Buddha.
Yeah.
One is the rejection of the Atma, the metaphysics of Atma, of soul, which is. But I think historic Buddha went only halfway. He rejected anything that is permanent, and because everything was in constant motion, and for historic Buddha. So in that sense, there is some partial truth, and the other is moksha through a sort of an experience, which is of. For historic Buddha, I think the experience was of a meditative change of consciousness. But for Ambedkar, he interprets that as not as sapriyaude, not to take anything for granted, to question. Because there are a couple of sayings of Buddha, if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha, you don't take anybody's word for it, experience the truth yourself. Now that experience was not necessarily an empirical sensory experience for Buddha. It was a spiritual experience, which a Vedantist would also grant. That it's that in fact a lot of Vedantists claim Hinduism to be scientific because it is experience based. The problem is that experience is non-verifiable. That experience of a meditative Buddha, whatever he or she experiences in that state of consciousness, cannot be replicated by you or me, or then they'll say, oh well, get trained in yoga and you can replicate it. Even trained yogis do not have the same experience sitting in the meditative position. So for actual Buddha and traditional Buddhism, it is not empirical sensory experience, but it is very clear. Navayana, he is using Buddha as an anchor to start a new conversation in which Buddha becomes a symbol of questioning, and if you read his Buddha and his Dhamma, the book, you don't find historic Buddha there at all. He reinterprets everything about him. In the original, he doesn't leave home because he's seen. Remember that all is dukkha, and he leaves home. He's seen an old man dying, and etc. etc. No, in Ambedkar's case, Rahul, the young Buddha, chooses to leave home in search for peace between two tribes. So he renounces war and chooses peace. I mean, a total reinterpretation. He is starting a new, entirely new religion come intellectual movement, Ambedkar is, and in which he is trying to do that, to question, to not accept things, take things for granted, question the orthodoxy. He's trying to make it into a sacred commitment of his followers. I mean, the new Buddhists it is their religious duty to be unorthodox, to question, that sort of a thing. But that's why it has failed to take, because it doesn't have it doesn't have deep cultural roots, this way of thinking. Except for some highly educated professional Dalits who have embraced that intellectual part of Neo-Buddhism. Others are, to them, Ambedkar himself becomes an icon, a godlike figure, and Buddha, you go to any Buddhist temple, there's no difference between a Buddhist and the Hindu temple in practices. And so, this has been done before. Auguste Comte tried to start a religion of humanity, To some extent, Ambedkar is doing something like that, starting a new religion, which is universalist, which is skeptical,
consistent with enlightenment values.
Yeah. That, and Buddha becomes a sort of a anchor point for that. But it's important to recognize that it is not historic Buddhism.
That's what
it's not historic. He's not preaching Buddhism as it has existed anywhere in the world. He's starting a new version of, and one can say all religions interpret themselves to match with the new era, and so this is a new interpretation of Buddha. Buddha would have done this had he lived today, that kind of a thing, which again is not clear, because historically Buddhism wasn't all that enlightened, and the record of Buddhist kingdoms, the Tibet, the Tibetan lamas, the Nepal, I mean the historic record is not all that enlightened and liberated, and